Good morning. Thank you for joining us on this Reporters Direct. I'm Sowmiya Ashok. I am speaking to you from Bengaluru, where I am currently looking at the aftermath of the floods that sort of came down hard and inflicted parts of eastern zone of Bengaluru. Before we start and go into the questions, I would like to sort of give you a summary of what I've seen in the last few days, and then we can take it from there. So, as we all saw last week, we saw several instances of, images of water gushing down the outer ring road in east zone of Bengaluru. This is a zone, and if we can sort of imagine large tech parks, humongous campuses, lots of built-up area, and in the middle of all this were commuters pushing their bikes and cars through flood waters that were gushing at them. We also saw images of more upmarket, sort of upscale communities where people were being rescued by boats, people were being rescued by tractors, and also people who were sort of being asked to come down from first and second floors through ladders and so on. So what I did as soon as I got in was to try and understand how these neighborhoods are recovering just a few days after what we saw were devastating floods. So on Sunday, I visited some of the major parts of the outer ring road in eastern zone of Bengaluru, looking at what is the reality on the ground. One of the things I noticed in the place I went to was this tech park called EcoSpace, one of the major areas on the outer ring road that was badly inundated. I think if you've been following the news and looking at images, there was a specific red foot-over bridge that went over, which keeps coming up in images, and this space, this sort of tech place is just below that. When I visited on Sunday afternoon, I saw a JCB machine sort of, raking up mud, and found out that they were trying to connect two parts of the drain so that the water flows much better. So things were starting to, the water had dried up entirely, but people were also starting to figure out how do we fix this for it not to happen again. So what I saw on the ground was civic bodies. I was looking at the sewage infrastructure, the people who take care of Bangalore sewage infrastructure. I was looking at the folks who supply electricity, the utility guys. So all of these combined to try and retrofit, I guess, a living and breathing city so that this doesn't happen again. I also visited parts of Sowkere. Sowkere is just a tiny little lake behind EcoSpace, where there were much more vulnerable communities living in those areas, in lower lying areas surrounded by high rises. Spoke to them about how difficult it was to recuperate from the floods. On Monday, I went to Rainbow Drive. Now, if you again look at the past images of 1 week, you'd find that certain, communities, gated communities in Bangalore were in the news. One of them was Rainbow Drive. Rainbow Drive is in Sarjapur Road, and it is when you're driving into the community itself, you can see a slight dip, and it goes sort of upwards. So it's made of 13 main roads, smaller main roads, and there are about 400 plots, about 300 houses there. And the first four main roads were badly sort of inundated. Water had come into everybody's houses. When I went, it was people literally throwing things out because everything had been completely devastated. So this is kind of the background. In the context of all of this, the chief minister of the state had announced that, he's going to go after encroachments on a war footing without any sort of bias. If there's anything that is in the way of encroaching stormwater drains, he was trying to get rid of it. So in the last 2 days, the civic body, the local civic body called BBMP, has been actually going on demolition drives, trying to clear encroachments affecting stormwater drains. Just so we can take some questions now. One of the things that I was asked, and this is a question by Mr. Aditya Chandra, what impact is the flood mismanagement have on the reputation of Bangalore as an IT hub capital and future investments? So definitely this has been in the news, right? So we've seen that what we have understood and seen as India's Silicon Valley, that's how all of the news organizations are sort of calling this place. And all that we saw last week was this sort of devastation of the tech parks and people, being moved around in various ways without any help, sort of people having to, we literally saw like Bentleys and Audis and all the big sort of CEOs of these tech parks being affected. So it's been in the news, and it's definitely brought into focus perhaps the larger issue of how these areas are being planned. What was the land use previously like? Is there sort of conversation to be had right now on fixing issues such as better stormwater drains, wider stormwater drains, also the concretization that has happened because of these tech parks? Will it affect the way water seeps into the ground? Is there a larger look here that we need to do on better planning as such? So as such as a reputation, not so much. I think this is one of those freak floods that happened for a few days that everyone was a little shocked by. But what I found on the ground was an immediate sort of understanding of how do we fix this? So one of the ways is at least a conversation that has begun amongst people on is there sort of a way forward where when we are expanding Bengaluru city as it grows bigger, is there scope for better understanding of how to plan these new parts that are coming up? What are the possible implications of this mismanagement? Will responsible officials be sacked? So far, we have not seen that. There has been, like I said, a war footing on going after encroachments. In some cases, there is a blame game. What I found yesterday on the ground was old-time residents of Bengaluru, some of them not Kannadigas, they've come from outside working in tech parks and so on. Some of them said it's unfair to blame them for what has happened. It is, after all, the government that gave developers the permit to build these big communities over here. So in a sense, the understanding I got yesterday was it was sort of like an interesting sort of combination of things that led to this, an interesting combination or like a nexus in a way of, how the sort of urbanization happens rampantly, and a very important need to look back to understand how these permits are even given in the first place. Are we building on wetlands? Are we building on existing sort of Rajakalways, as they call it here, the old irrigation canals and the old natural stormwater drains that existed in Bengaluru? Is there a real sort of look here? And it's a historic problem of we've been building on this for years. And this is not unique to Bengaluru. This is a problem that you can perhaps extend to other parts of the country as well. The second question we have is from Mr. Narasimha Rao. He asks if the municipal corporations gets the drainage lines cleaned and desilted before the monsoon every year. I think this is again a conversation that's being had across the country. I come from Chennai, and this is an issue that we too have on how quickly are we desilting and preparing ourselves for the next round of rainfall. And in this sense, definitely that's been a question here. I walked around different parts of eastern Bengaluru and other parts of Bengaluru looking at drains, and there's physically, debris, silt, solid waste in these nalas, in these drains. There's even people throwing garbage. This is one of the biggest issues that we always face in India in many of our growing and sort of, buzzing cities, that how do we keep a drain flowing continuously so that it goes to where it's intended instead of getting blocked in all of these places. So that is definitely desilting is a word that I've heard a lot in the last few days of being in Bengaluru, the need of the hour and sort of doing it regularly. Does the stormwater have separate drainage lines with proper gradients maintained? Again, one more issue with this. The way Bengaluru is planned, and this is something I've just come to learn in the last few days, given I'm not a native of the city, is that it is built on a ridge. That's why we all love and appreciate Bangaluru's weather, because it has an elevation. And the thing about the ridge is that the water naturally drains. There's a slope that goes, both ways. So there are several valleys around the city. And what we saw to be the issue was in the eastern part of the city. So from the middle part, all of this was sort of the excess rainwater that we saw last week was draining into the eastern zone. So there is a bit of a natural gradient going, but of course, I think the issue is the mixing of rainwater and drainage. That is not a clear delineation at this point. There is certain mixing of both, which is something that the municipal corporation is trying to address. There's a story that I will be doing later about one of the major drains. I won't talk too much about it here, but look forward to this story. But essentially about how they're trying to use certain drains, major drains in the city as a model or as a pilot to see how do we be better at segregating these two, rainwater and drainage. I think I'm just also looking for some questions here. One of the questions is, how receptive is the political circle regarding dialogue around climate change and action items? How do we preempt whataboutism regarding climate change? Great question. Thank you for asking. Essentially, people do understand that climate change, to an extent, is causing this kind of intensity. A few years ago, when I was working for another publication, I wrote a piece about the Indian Met Department collating data from across different metro cities. And what they essentially found was the way in which rainfall patterns are changing, how sharply they come down just in a matter of 3-4 days, and how that completely inundates cities, and to an extent that we're not even prepared. It's all come down, and then you're dealing with the gush and volume of water. So this is something that's known to us. We have data actually given by our own, Indian Meteorological Department. It's something that the central government has this information on which metros and how much of rain is coming down. So it's not a new sort of learning that this is the kind of intensity that's coming down. But what has happened in Bengaluru, at least, is the political conversation of this is also become a bit of, like you said, he said, she said. And it has impacted how work is getting done on the ground. While the chief minister immediately said, let's go after all encroachments, and he blamed the previous Congress government for not sort of desilting drains or not removing these encroachments. The previous Congress government has said, hold on, when we were in power, why didn't you call it out if this was such a big issue? So I think everybody's responding as politicians to the issue now. This conversation also came up in the Legislative Assembly yesterday. There was a light moment between the opposition and the ruling party about whether an opposition, former chief minister, in fact, took a boat to visit one of the upmarket areas or not. This was the conversation. So we are still in this realm of I suppose whataboutism and sort of blame game just to get through the disaster quickly. Another question we have again is from Mr. Aditya Chandra. If municipality elections in Bangalore were taken on time, will the situation would have happened? I'm sorry, I don't really know the answer to this question since I am more of a Tamil Nadu and Chennai city reporter. I'm not very familiar with the local body elections here. This is, again, a great question. Will this be a principal issue in next year assembly elections, or will it be forgotten like we've seen in other states? I think your guess is as good as mine here. I don't think we take climate change very seriously or environmental issues very seriously yet. Unfortunately, it is right now in our face, very much something that we have to deal with. But I'm not entirely sure that this sort of has gotten to a stage where it affects the way we vote. So I do think that will still require a few more, I don't know what needs to happen for us to take this more seriously. Pardon me. It's already affecting our lives, and more importantly, all of that we've seen in Bengaluru, a lot of it has been folks who live in very comfortable situations otherwise, but have had the opportunity to interact with the vulnerable groups of people, and frankly, there is no solution to this. Many of them live in low-lying areas. Many of them live in settlements and slum areas. Their belongings are completely gone. A lot of it is their rations, their even money that they've stored in their houses, their clothes, their children's school books. These are things that are irreplaceable unless they earn another month's salary and go back to buying fresh things. So I think it's important that when we are making plans for how to adapt our cities for climate change or adapt for these kind of freak environmental crises as we go forward, it's important to include everybody. But what ends up happening is we end up looking at it also from an election perspective or a sort of vote perspective, and it's never really fully, taking every citizen into consideration. The next question is about whether foreign investors are planning to shift away from, Bengaluru to places like Gurgaon, Noida after seeing this mismanagement. I don't think we've seen that level of immediate reaction to these floods. And then again, we've also seen similar sort of flooding in places like Gurgaon and Noida, because those are also built up areas and urbanized areas. So it's not necessarily the case that this is not going to happen elsewhere. I think once again, calling into question the entire reason, the entire sort of learning that we can make from this. It's very, very clear that this whole situation gives us a great look at how can we manage our land better? How can we sort of think about land use? If you're looking at multiple players in a specific land, how do they all interact with each other? Is it possible to sort of have a wonderful integrated way with rainwater harvesting, with sort of spaces where you can make sure the rainwater drains away and so on and so forth. So with this in a way in Bengaluru is a sort of good example to emulate elsewhere as well on how to plan better. One of the questions I got before also was about Chennai from Mr. B. Jayashankar. He said Chennai may see in 3 months what Bengaluru is experiencing now, and it'll be good for the print to assess the preparedness and determine learning from last year's problems. So as you can see, this is also an issue that people are relating to in other metro cities. Yes, Chennai has had an issue for years since our 2015 floods. We've had instances of flooding within the city, but there right now on a war footing, the municipal corporation is putting in stormwater drains. We've desilted stormwater drains. We've also dug up a lot of the city to retrofit stormwater drains into this sort of large city to make sure we're prepared for the next season. Perhaps we might not get it all entirely right, but I think the objective is to give it a sort of good shot in seeing what works. If it's not working, or if there are certain tweaks that need to be made, then we can adapt it to the next year. That's really how it's seen. The next question from Mr. Abhishek is, how optimistic are you that the lessons learned from this unfortunate event will be implemented before the next similar event in Bengaluru? This is a question I think I prefer to say that perhaps it's up to the both politicians and citizens. I do think as citizens of a particular city, and when we're living here and understanding or moving around and commuting and earning a living here, it's also important for us to understand what kind of land we live on. It's important for us to do our homework. So I think I'll address this more as a person living in a city rather than a journalist. And it would be important to say that from the sort of conversations I've had here, people are very aware that you can no longer say you don't know what kind of land you're living on. So it's essentially whether we push for these interventions as well, trying to understand whether the construction we live on is previously on a wetland or a natural stormwater drain of some sort. If that is the case, how then to do a better job of adapting the environment to make sure water doesn't stagnate, or invest in essential rainwater harvesting systems and so on. I'll give you an example. I did a piece yesterday, like I said, about the Rainbow Drive community. One of the first things I noticed, and something they pointed out to me, is they were one of the first communities to actually think about the environment. So they have a very strict and very clear rainwater harvesting project in place. Everybody is sort of having to be cued into it. Secondly, they recycle all of their water. So residents showed me little taps everywhere in the neighborhood where recycled water comes through from various like kitchen wastewater that comes through from different houses, gets sort of pooled together, and it's used to sort of water plants and so on. So the idea is to say, when we have this kind of situation, or when we have a certain problem, it's not just about saying it's the corporation's problem, municipal corporation's problem, or it's the politician not caring. I think the optimism, for me at least, comes from ourselves educating ourselves about where we live and how we live, and also asking for help. I mean, I think very clearly there is no dearth of expertise in our country to understand how do we adapt to these kinds of events, and how does one sort of go about helping this from not happening again. We can do our bit to it. The other questions are about Chennai, which I have already sort of spoken about. There's one more from Mr. Sri, who he says, thank you for doing this work on Bangalore floods. I feel instead of Bangalore floods, it needs to be Bangalore's poor infrastructure and lack of foresight and planning for the future. We consistently hear accusations lobbed around between the BBMP's apathy towards Bangalore infrastructure and the developers' flaunting of the norms. It would be good to get an unbiased view into where the major problem is to solve and what is to be done to solve this. The Outer Ring Road flood, even for a small rain, hope this will tell us on how and when we can fix it. In this case, he's absolutely right. I think what we're seeing is a really complicated situation where people also tend to, like you say, like one of our viewers just pointed out, the whataboutery around this. Is it just that we are looking at a snapshot? This has happened last week. How do we get out of the situation by blaming each other and then not really fixing the problem and moving on? I think in this situation, there's definitely multiple players involved. Yesterday, in one of the stories I was trying to report on, they showed me all the different players and all the different agencies that operate near a stormwater drain. It's quite mind-boggling how much goes into planning an urban space. And I think in this case, yes, like rainfall coming down hard is one thing, but are we coordinated in our efforts to sort of bring in an intervention? That's something that we really need to think about for ourselves. And how does that go about? Is the municipal corporation and the BWSSB, conversing about sewage and other kind of utilities? Everything needs to be sort of examined better. So definitely the conversations here in Bengaluru, especially amongst the community, is that are we not talking enough to each other as government agencies? Are we not talking as a community member to the government, saying these are the problem spots? Because after all, those are the people living in that area. They know those areas better. So is there need, say, then to have a proper, channel of communication? Say I have a complaint, say I see waterlogging here. Is it possible to complain or speak to somebody in the government? And are they immediately taking my complaint on? One of the wonderful sort of suggestions I received for a story which I wrote on Sunday was the Mega Sandesha app that I was told about, which was sort of built in collaboration with the Karnataka Natural Disaster Management and the Indian Institute of Science. And in these, they had little sensors that were put in stormwater drains to see the amount of water gushing in real time to also measure rainfall falling at that spots and so on. And this app was supposed to give you a wonderful sort of real-time update on where things stand, so that it could then lead to better interventions, say evacuating people in low-lying areas, or warning somebody that there is about to be a flood. So one of the water experts I spoke to in Bengaluru said, instead of winding down an app like this, we should be scaling up. The government should, in fact, say, let's use this at a much higher level. Let's actually, because all of us, and especially in a place like Bengaluru that is so heavy on the way that it promotes and works with technology, perhaps this is one of the interventions that we can look at. So overall, I think it's a complicated situation of a built-up, completely, I guess urbanization, as we grow as a country, as we grow as cities, urbanization is coming down hard on us. Everybody's, developers are looking at places to build more. People are looking to move into these large high rises. But I guess this is a good opportunity to sit and think about how can we then also integrate the environment and think more sensibly about it. So just waiting for any more last questions, if you may, but that's pretty much the summary of the last week of floods in Bengaluru. Just one more from Mr. Aditya Chandra. We've seen a lot of diverse climatic situation this year, from scorching heat in months of April and May to floods in places like Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and Karnataka. Have we started seeing the impacts of climate change? This is definitely a question for scientists. I don't think every single incident can be clearly said to be a climate change event, but we are seeing extreme weather. You're absolutely right in your observations, sir. There are, not just in India, right? We've seen this across the world. We're looking at flash floods. We're looking at, incredible, even bushfires in places like California, which we saw, or Australia. Definitely, the environment is talking to us very clearly, sending us signals. These are issues that we have to start paying attention to, especially if we want to live and be more prepared when these hit us. So with that, I think I will leave. If there are any more questions, I leave it at this. Please do follow us at ThePrint for more coverage on the floods, on the aftermath of the floods, and look forward to keeping in touch. Thank you.